where do you think you would want to direct? So there may be some tax relief. Would it be workers? Income tax? Would it be IHT, inheritance tax? As and when the cash comes your way, where might it go? It is a different way of asking it, Mr. Hunt. You have to accept that.
I do accept that, and I respect the brilliance of the way you've phrased it. I mean, look, there are good arguments for cutting taxes across the board, and I do want to cut taxes, and I could give you an argument for cutting any one of those taxes. If you said to me right now, what is my biggest priority, it is to cut taxes on business to get growth going in the economy. But I think the bigger question that you and lots of people here in Manchester want to know the answer to is, can we have faster growth and get away from ever ratcheting taxes going up and up? And the answer is we can, but there are no shortcuts. We have to unleash companies, allow them to grow, make it easier for them to grow, but we also have to spend taxpayers' money more efficiently, including reforms to the welfare state. Now, those are difficult decisions. Rishi Sunak and I are prepared to take those decisions, because there is a fundamental choice in British politics between a party that does want to bring down the tax burden and the Labour Party, which, when they were in power, increased taxes in 13 out of 13 budgets.
I am a Thatcherite, and
how does it feel then, having been a senior member of a government, that now we find ourselves, as you rightly say, the highest tax take since World War? It doesn't sit with my understanding of Thatcherism.
Well, of course, now I get criticised a lot for this, but I do speak about the economic revolution that Margaret Thatcher brought to our country in the 1980s. And you have to remember, she tackled high levels of unemployment, inflation, very topical in terms of our own economy right now. And we still had economic growth, above 3%, 4%, 5% for a considerable period of time. Now, with this, of course, you've asked me how does it feel? As a Thatcherite, and I have been in government, I have been involved in previous governments when David Cameron was Prime Minister, and I was the Employment Minister, I was also Treasury Minister, where we did a lot basically to help working people, working households. And that is effectively what our philosophy is, and I think differentiates us between the Labour Party. And as we go into the general election next year, this is important in terms of letting people keep more of the money in their pockets, and also making sure that we're supporting businesses on things like employment taxes, business taxes and things of that nature.
Dame Priti, even Labour hasn't taxed us this much.
Well, there are a number of reasons as to why taxes are at a 70-year high. And I'm sure, Nick, you probably spoke about the IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies report on Friday. It had some deeply alarming figures in there as to how the size of the state is growing at a faster rate than our actual tax take. Now, we can and we should look back to the pandemic. There's no doubt about that, because the government made a range of interventions. But that does not mean we should be continuing that trajectory and journey. So that means, yes, we have to make collectively, government, Conservatives in government, and actually everyone in government must make different choices.
Well, I find that interesting as we see that HS2 has 167 people in its PR department that costs £8 million a year. Chancellor, HS2's PR at the moment is the same level of Kim Jong-un. Where is the money going?
Well, Nick, I'm not going to tell you what.
That's not responsible spending.
Let me answer your question very directly. I can't tell you what's going to happen on HS2 because the decision hasn't formally been made.
I wasn't even going to try.
And you are rightly not going to try. But what I can say as Chancellor is that I need to have an answer as to why it costs 10 times more to build high-speed rail in this country than it does across the Channel in France. And we need good economic infrastructure. It's very important for the country. But some of that spend that you've been talking about is totally unacceptable.
And will be clamped down.
We will be I'll be talking this afternoon about how we're going to spend all taxpayers' money more efficiently, because that is absolutely essential.
As a former Home Secretary, I'd like your comment on this. You may be aware there's growing fear among retailers in particular as what's called, I'm going to call it shop theft. I think shoplifting makes it sound far too light. And companies are losing tens of millions of pounds. And more importantly, people are actually the victim, in some instances, of fairly serious violence. Shouldn't there be some kind of aggravated clause? You'll know better better about law than I, that if I attack someone in a supermarket or a bicycle store, it's actually an aggravated offence?
So the answer is yes, and there has been some great work actually that's taken place actually in the Home Office over previous years. My former colleague Kit Morthouse did a great deal of work on this. I used to work with the Association of Convenience Stores. People know my background, my family ran small shops. We did a lot of work because actually, to be very, very candid, independent retailers have for years, decades suffered violence, abuse, loss of income because of shoplifting. It's just blatant theft, raids on shops, all sorts of things. What is so interesting right now, though, of course, the British Retail Consortium and the big chains now are speaking about this. I would urge them all to continue to do so because they can affect changes to our laws. The other final point to make on this is that the police do have powers. The police need to be using their powers off arrest and making sure that they're charging people for the right crimes.
But they're not. So, I mean, it is said that unless it's about 200 quid's worth of goods, the police don't really want to get...
Well, the police need to do that. They have the powers. Well, there's a lot of assumption making that, we change our laws, we need to do this, the police aren't doing enough of this. The police do have the powers, and it's incumbent, I think, on everybody, really, through the police and crime commissioners and chief constables, to really work with their retail communities. They've got more resources now, the police. They've got more police officers. They should be absolutely targeting this, and alongside the fact that antisocial behaviour is often linked in local communities to some of these crimes as well.
You were a long-standing health secretary. You will be aware that today, sadly, we see that industrial action ratchet up again. And one newspaper reveals, you won't have had time to see this, but I'll share it with you. One doctor was handed £7,900 to cover one strike shift. Again, you say you want to make sure every pound is spent wisely. Well, a bit like HS2, it's not, is it?
Well, I think it's very depressing when you read those stories. What I would say is that money could have been spent giving several operations to other patients on the waiting list. Instead, it's having to be paid to man an A&E department on an emergency shift or however. And what I would urge doctors is to sit round the table with Steve Barclay, discuss areas, not pay because they've got an above inflation pay award, but the other things that we can do together to make the NHS work better, because that's what we all want.
What sort of job is your successor, Stella Braverman, doing as Home Secretary?
It's a tough job being Home Secretary, and I think, look, this government in particular has put a great emphasis and a focus on stopping the boats. I think you and I...
You stop the boats.
So you and I have spoken about this so many times. I've always said, and I still maintain, there isn't a single solution to this. I put a lot of resources into upstream intelligence. We put the MOD, the Royal Navy and the Channel. We did all sorts of issues, all sorts of practical things that came about. But at the same time, deporting people, removing people, making sure those with no legal right, where we have all these agreements with countries, that is important. But of course, I think it's very, very difficult once you've made a very strong pledge to stop the boats. The boats are still coming.
Well, he's not going to honour that, is he? He can't stop the boats. So, it's not within his power.
It's a government position that the government has taken. And we used to work across government, actually. We had something called the Illegal Migration Task Force, because I just don't believe it's one government department, the Home Office. Everyone has to work together. In our case, we work with the MOD, as you've heard me say, and also Justice Department on prosecutions, the immigration courts and tribunals. The laws are in place now, Nick. So I personally feel that there are laws in place where we can put the deterrence factor in. Of course, the government now needs to implement and operationalise those laws through the Illegal Migration Bill and the National Anti-Borders Act.
Your colleague, Gillian Keegan, is going to suggest that mobile phones are banned in schools. How do you think that would sit with your children?
Well, you've met my kids, actually,
Nick,
and I'm pleased to say that they weren't using a mobile phone when you met them, because I think they were just a little bit too young then. Do you know, it is a nightmare extracting my children away from their screens. They are so addictive, and I love my children dearly.
Of course you do.
But sometimes, when you see them after a long day's work and they don't want to talk to daddy, they want to talk to their iPad, I don't think it's right. And
it depends
and
what you want to say, by the way.
It's also mildly, it's mildly insulting
the iPad
as
might
well.
About tax cuts.
Daddy's home and all they want to do is talk to the iPad. But there you are. So I thoroughly agree with this. I think it's the right thing to do. And also, I think...
But how is it going to be done?
It's the right thing, by the way, it's the right thing academically, but it's also the right thing socially, because school is the time when the closest and deepest friendships are formed, and you can't do that if you're being distracted by a phone.
You'll be aware that when you started as Home Secretary, the number of people arrivals was at 1,843. In your last year, it was 45,774. If you're a football manager, you'd be relegated. Why? Why is that record so bad?
Because, as we've discussed and you've just said, stopping the boats is not straightforward. I think the Home Office projections this year, they're planning for 50,000 people. And
more than that, actually.
Well, there you go.
Nudging 100.
And that's on top of the fact, you have heard me say this before, global migration crisis, lots of displacement. Don't forget, we've had wars and conflicts. People are always on the move. They really are. There is more to be done, I think, with our partners upstream, Belgium, Germany, France. There's a lot of investment, I think, nearly 500 million euros that's gone into France. They should be doing much more in terms of actually stopping the boats, the arrests, rather than just sort of, picking people up and then sort of releasing them back, which we know the French do. There is more that can be done there. So, there isn't a single solution, and I've always been very, very upfront about that. But at the same time, there are various strands of work that's taking place across government. The government does need to persist with this, they really do.